going to start this off with a fun question. I don't know about fun, but it's a question. That's going to set everything up. I just gave it away. All right. Who here has a story, a personal story, a short personal story that they can tell that significantly changed something about the way they think about something or shaped their identity? And I already asked Jazz. So Paul, you're too far back, okay? So I'm gonna go with, no, I have a volunteer. Brody, all right, I'm coming this way. Brody, I'm still in SKC mode, so I'm just running. 2-3 sentences or 5, nice and short.
I was really wrestling with my belief in God. It was due to some silly song and Reddit tier atheism. And I was really wrestling with this stuff, and I kept on praying and praying. I talked to a pastor and a youth pastor about it. We went to wrestling far away, and I was just totally distraught. My mind was on God. Is God real? Got home, didn't really have any answers. I kept on praying and praying. And my sister was sick with strep throat, and she got up in the middle of the night to ask my parents to take her to the hospital, and they, of course, never would for something like strep throat that, you can wait till the morning type of thing. But she got up anyways. She went downstairs, and our house was full of smoke. And what had happened is the divider in the furnace tipped over, and all the carbon monoxide and soot had entered into our house. And if she had gotten up an hour later, we all would have died. And to me, that kind of answered all the questions that I had been praying about at that point, because you could say, well, why would God allow my sister to be sick? Well, if she was sick, she wouldn't have gotten up. Why would God allow that divider, and it fell the way that it did, and it fell a different way. The smoke or the soot wouldn't have came out with it, and it just would have been CO2, and it would have killed us all. So that was God, working through all of that, saving our whole family. Yeah.
And yeah, amen, right? And I just released a Steps and Stories video of us talking about that. So go on to our website or onto YouTube and check that out if you want a fuller, deeper story. I have a story where all throughout high school, or middle school, elementary school, high school, I never got picked for things. We would be in an assembly like this, and there would be someone on stage, and they would be like, I need someone from the audience, and I would always be like, I want that. I want to be the guy. Pick me. And I was never picked. And so I kind of grew up thinking like, I'm never the guy that gets picked. But there was a cool story where recently I got picked to win some camera gear for a church podcast that I listened to. And I was like, yes, I got picked. So stories, they shape us, they change us. This is a rhetorical question, but are there cultural stories that shape us as Americans? I'm sure we can think of some. American independence, July 4th, right? We are an independent nation. Forget all of that community stuff. That's not us. The American dream. Let's go out west and let's go to California, get gold, become rich. And that kind of fuels the way that we think about things, the world. Civil rights movement, the Civil War, freedom for all. Like these are good things. Those are good things that kind of shape the way that we think about things. And there's even some fictional stories like Superman, right? We all kind of want to be Superman or Batman, I don't know. Marvel movies, Disney movies, Star Wars movies, these all shape the way that we think about the world. Stories shape our identity, our values, and our hopes. And oftentimes, more so than just knowledge. Knowledge has the ability to shape our identity, values, and hopes, but oftentimes stories are able to impact those three things more than just knowledge about something. So as we come to the Bible, prose discourse takes up about 24% of what we read in the Bible, and prose discourse is the New Testament, a lot of the New Testament letters. If what I am saying is true, then you should do this, and therefore this is the way you should live. That's about 24% of the Bible. Poetry is 33%. And gosh, poetry is so hard to understand, especially Hebrew poetry. And then narrative is about 43% of the Bible. And so, and I skipped something. Disney CEO Bob Chapek said this about stories. We are telling important stories, raising up voices, and I believe changing hearts and minds. These and all of our diverse stories are our corporate statements, and they are more powerful than any tweet or lobbying effort. So, the CEO of one of the biggest storytelling corporations on the planet says that about stories. We don't have to put out a statement. We don't have to tweet. We don't have to do anything lobbying. Like, we're going to just tell our stories, and that's going to do the work for us. Think what you want to think about Disney. So one way to remember stories is oral tradition. We live in a time where oral tradition is all but lost. But oral tradition is a way that we can remember stories. And there are a couple of things that we can use in oral tradition to help us remember said stories. The first one is design patterns. So scripture, the Bible is ancient Jewish meditation literature. And I'll say that all again. Ancient Jewish meditation literature. The idea behind reading the Bible is that you read it again and again and again, and you start picking up on these things called design patterns, where you see something in Genesis and it happens again in Exodus, and then it's picked up again in Isaiah. I'm just making stuff up. But like you keep on saying, you see these design patterns, and when you see that design pattern, you think back to the original time that it was mentioned and say, okay, what did I learn here and how can I apply it now? Design patterns are a very big way to remember stories. Psalm 1 says, meditate on it day and night. You read it again, again, and again. And the fun thing that I love about design patterns and biblical themes, which would be kind of a design pattern, is that you don't have to be a biblical scholar to see them. You just have to be devoted to reading the Bible again and again and again, and eventually you will start to pick up on that, and you'll be like, oh, I see this. And you have those moments of discovery, and that's the way you learn. I wanted to share with you that to kind of prove my point that design patterns exist. I watched all of the Star Wars movies this week, 1 through 9, to figure this out. And I'm kidding. I didn't do that. I didn't know. I looked this up. But check this out. There's narrative beats in episode 1, 4, and 7. 7, is this? Yeah, 7, right. They're in sets of 3. It's hard. Okay, so here's the story beats. There's a galaxy under tyrannical rule that happens in episodes 1, 4, and 7. A young protagonist on a desert planet. Anakin on Tatooine, Luke on Tatooine, Rey on Jakku. Hidden message in a droid. Kind of hints at it with Padme as the handmaid, but R2-D2, BB-8. We don't know where the droid is found by that unknown hero. There's a call to adventure. There's a wise old mentor. There's a massive enemy weapon that must be destroyed. The Death Star, Starkiller Base. There's a climactic space battle, and there's a masked villain with a secret identity. Like, you can watch those 3 movies, and they're kind of just riffing off of each other, right? So this happens, even if we don't see it and think about it, design patterns happen a lot within storytelling. But the fun thing about biblical design patterns is that eventually you start to see those things and then they kind of flip it. So let's go to the next slide. In Star Wars, there is a really, really, really well-known quote. No, Darth Vader says this, no, I am your father. Thank you, Brandon. I am your father. And it's a big, huge reveal moment. Sorry, spoilers. Spoilers if you haven't watched Star Wars. Darth Vader is Luke's father. Anyways. But there's a fun parody. Don't go there yet. There's a fun parody of Star Wars. I cannot recommend you watch it. Probably please don't watch it. But there's a funny parody of Star Wars where the villain, who is basically Darth Vader, says, no, I am your father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate. right? And it's like, oh, I know what you were going to say, but then you said something else. You flipped it for a humorous effect. That happens within biblical stories a lot. Maybe not humor, but oftentimes when a design pattern is flipped, it's for a moral critique, a highlight of a new fulfillment, God's grace or judgment on Israel. And so as we kind of go towards Ezra and Nehemiah, a few patterns that we're going to see are the temple, which is God's personal presence in and among the people of Israel. Originally, it was the tabernacle, then it became the temple, and eventually God's presence left the temple. And another one is the city. And the city, as we continue to read through the story of the Bible, is a place of human pride and rebellion. And oftentimes, a city in biblical terms is a town that has a wall around it. A town that has a wall around it. That constitutes a city according to the Bible. And it's a place of human pride and rebellion. It starts with Cain. We see it again in Egypt. Jericho, a town with a big wall around it, right? Nineveh, and eventually New Jerusalem, which is kind of cool. Because the city, which is a human invention, which is a thing for human pride and rebellion, eventually God takes that and incorporates it into his new creation, which is kind of a cool concept, right? God started with a garden. Why doesn't heaven just be a big garden? There's something cool about God taking something that humans have created and he redeems it for his purposes. So, with all of that in mind, let's retell Israel's story, get to the scroll of Ezra and Nehemiah, and we'll see if there are hyperlinks that are activated as we continue. So I'm going to try and do this nice and, oh man, am I already halfway through? Okay, let's keep on going. Creation. There's a creation story, and especially as it's given to Israel, the purpose of the creation story is to show Israel that Yahweh is different than all of the other gods that Israel is around. Eventually, in creation, after creation, there's a fall. There's a flood. God says, hey, I'm going to pick one person to create a nation out of. That's Abraham. Eventually, they go into Egypt. Bing, 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 Egypt. That's a big one. And they are in slavery for 400 or so years. But there is an exodus from slavery. There is freedom. Unfortunately, they wander around the desert for a while. And in those wandering years, there's stories of Israel doing something and God saying, whoa, 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 let's give you some laws to not do that thing again. And they say, okay. And then there's a story of God or Israel doing things. And then God's like, whoa, 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 let's not do that either. And then there's more laws given. So that's kind of the wandering of Israel in the wilderness. Eventually, there's also some promises given in that time. Eventually, they get into the land. They get into Israel. And unfortunately, then the judges come where Israel stops obeying the laws of God and they start downward spiraling. And then a judge rises up to correct Israel or to kick out the bad guys or whatever it might be. It's a downward cycle. Eventually, Israel looks at everyone and is like, they have kings. I want a king. God, can we have a king? And God's like, yes, I'll give you a king. Not what he wanted, because he wanted to be their king. And then they continued to break the law. During the reign of the kings of Israel, prophets came to warn Israel and also gave a lot more promises of a future Messiah, a future king, a future kingdom, and all of those things. And a super quick thing, the cool thing about the Bible is that it's a minority report. Oftentimes, history is written from the victors, the people who won the battles, and we don't hear from the side that lost. But the Bible is written from the people who, the people in charge just kept on pushing down. So the Bible is a minority report. Some of those promises that the prophets give were Jeremiah said that after 70 years, the captivity would be over and that God would bring them back into the land. Ezekiel talks about how God will change the heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. Isaiah talks about how all nations will stream to a new Jerusalem, a multi-ethnic kingdom of blessing to all nations. So after Israel continued and continually disobeyed God's commands, and God continually tried to rescue them, he said, okay, enough is enough, and he banishes them. I shouldn't say banish. He uses other nations to bring Israel out of their land. We call that the exile. Babylonian burns the place that they came and take people from. Assyria assimilates people, and eventually Babylon and Assyria are conquered by Persia. And this is kind of where we start to pick up the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. The nation of Israel is in a new Egypt, a new Babylon. And so, coming back to stories, they are not in their land anymore. Israel has been banished from their land, have been taken away from their land as punishment from God, but they held on to their stories. And they told their stories again and again and again to their children so that their cultural identity would remain intact, even though they are trying to be assimilated into the different kingdoms that have conquered them. And so you get to a point where these children that are growing up in exile have this idea of like, we're not supposed to be here in exile. We are in a sort of exile. We're not supposed to be here, but there's a promise given that they're not going to remain there, and they hold on to that. So with all of that in mind, let's turn to Ezra, the book of Ezra. I know it's Nehemiah, but we'll get there. Let's turn to the book of Ezra and just kind of start to see what is happening. And the reason why we're going to turn to the book of Ezra is because in the Tanakh, which is the Jewish version of our Old Testament, it's the same, except it's shifted and it's just a little bit different in its order. It's the same, just things are shifted a little bit. And the reason why I'm talking about Ezra and Nehemiah, because in the Jewish Old Testament, it's not their Old Testament, it is their Testament, but in that, it's Ezra and Nehemiah is one book, one scroll. So we're supposed to read Ezra and Nehemiah as one literary unit. It's not that we read Ezra and boom, there's a story, put a bow on it and be done with that. And then, oh, now here's Nehemiah, read that, put a bow on it, and then we read them together. And I'll point out why now. In this book, there are 3 parts and 3 points to each portion of the story. And then there's a conclusion. So there's 1, 2, 3 stories that happen, and then there's a conclusion that happens. And in those parts, there is a Persian king moved by God and sends a leader to Jerusalem. That leader who goes back to Jerusalem is faced with opposition to the rebuilding efforts. And then there is success at that task, but with a strange anticlimax that comes along with it. So really quickly, let's read Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord fulfilled the prophecy he had given through Jeremiah. He stirred the heart of Cyrus to put this proclamation in writing and send it throughout the kingdom. And then it goes on to say, hey, go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple. And so what we're seeing here is that God, I'm going to kind of jump ahead and then I'll come back. God is preparing Israel for a new exodus. Israel now, even though they are ruled by a Persian king, in essence, they are under Egypt. They are in slavery in Egypt again. But the Egypt is now Babylon, it's Persia, right? And so what we're supposed to be seeing are these hyperlinks that are starting to be activated, okay? 10 minutes, okay. There are hyperlinks that are being activated. Zerubbabel, he goes back to rebuild the temple. And the temple, again, is where God's personal presence is supposed to be with Israel. Ezra goes back to rebuild the law and to restore the purity of the nation. Nehemiah, he goes back to rebuild the walls. And again, if you have a town with walls around it, it's a city. Nehemiah goes back to build the city as an eternal, secure resting place for Israel. Here's a couple of more hyperlinks. In Exodus, God hardens Pharaoh's heart, but in Ezra, he softens it. So there's that flip, the design pattern flip. So that happens. And then in Exodus, Israel plunders Egypt's wealth, but in Ezra, the beginning of Ezra and Nehemiah, Israel is sent with Babylon's wealth. Nehemiah, he goes and he becomes a new Joshua to an extent because he goes and spies around the city to figure out how do we rebuild these walls in the same way that Joshua sent 12 spies into the promised land. So as the people of Israel are seeing all these things happen, and as we read the scroll of Ezra and Nehemiah, all of these hopes and expectations should be starting for us to be like, oh, this could be it. Maybe this is the time that Israel is going to succeed. And so I'm just going to run through this really quick because this is an overview, okay? I'm not getting into the weeds of Ezra and Nehemiah. This is an overview. In Ezra chapters 1 through 6, Zerubbabel is sent by Cyrus to rebuild the temple. He faces opposition inside and out, and he succeeds in building the temple. He does, but it's not the same as it was back then. God's personal presence does not come down and fill the temple. And there are people who saw the original temple, and they weep and they cry as other people are super excited. Like, we did it, we rebuilt the temple. And all of the old people are like, but it's not what it used to be. This is not what we were hoping for. Ezra chapter 7 through 10, Ezra is sent by Artaxerxes to teach the Torah and rebuild the community. Many people have remarried, they have divorced their Israelite wives and remarried other wives outside of their nation. And super quick, this is not a critique on race, this is a critique on religion. And then Ezra sends them away. But again, we're like, no, but God's temple was supposed to be for all nations. This is not the way that we were hoping this would be. And then Nehemiah in chapters 1 through 8, he asks Artaxerxes to go rebuild the walls. Outsiders try to stop this, and then Nehemiah sends people away from being priests and denies others from having any part of Jerusalem. So once all of those things are done, we get to Nehemiah 8 through 10, or 12. And at this point, we're like, okay, even though there's been some rough bumps along this road, maybe this is going to be it. Maybe this is the new Israel we were hoping for. There's a 7-day Torah reading marathon where people confess their sins and they say, hey, we're going to have a covenant faithfulness to God. And in Nehemiah 10, there's this whole chapters of, these are all of the promises that we will do, Nehemiah and Ezra. We are going to fulfill all of these promises that we've made. There's a festival of booths. This could be it. All of the things of Exodus are being replayed. And as we as the reader are supposed to say, yes, this is it, this is it. And if it ended at chapter 12, it would be like, okay, this is great, but we still have one more chapter in Nehemiah. It's chapter 13. Nehemiah had to go back to King Artaxerxes to report, hey, this is what I did. So he does that, and he comes back to Israel, and he finds that all of Zerubbabel, Ezra's, and his own work was undone by people neglecting the temple again and working on the Sabbath. And to us, that might be like, I work on the Sabbath sometimes. It's not that big of a deal. But again, Israel's cultural identity was wrapped up in the fact that our God is in this temple. And so like not working on the Sabbath was a big deal because it was supposed to remind us of Passover and the Exodus story. So them not doing that, it's kind of a big deal. The promises of Nehemiah 10 are broken in Nehemiah 13 because our hearts are prone to sin. That's just what happens. So when we get to the end of Nehemiah 13, we just kind of ask ourselves, like, I thought this was going to be it. I thought we were going to have this new Jerusalem. And we're left wondering, is there anyone who can fulfill God's commands? Reform doesn't change a human heart, and we can't legislate change in people's lives. Our hearts are just too hard for that to work. It's a downer of an ending. But all of that and all of the flaws point towards us needing something or someone else, and it's a new heart. A few hundred years later, after the book of Ezra and Nehemiah finish. There is a young boy who was born in some backwater, town, who lives a perfect life. And we all know his name. His name is Jesus. And he starts activating a ton of hyperlinks back to the Old Testament, back to the Tanakh. And all of our hopes and expectations start to rise up again. This guy's going around healing people. He's talking about how he's the better temple. And Jesus eventually dies on a cross and he rises from the dead. And again, he fulfills the hopes and expectations, and he flips that design pattern by dying and by raising again. The Jews are expecting him to come in riding on a donkey as he does, but he doesn't fulfill that prophecy in the way that they were hoping. They were hoping that he would be a military leader, but he flips it. Jesus fulfills and gives us, and he lives a perfect life, and he dies according to the law that Ezra brought back. He brings God's personal presence down to us in the way that Zerubbabel hoped for when he rebuilt the temple. But rather than just coming into a temple, he comes and lives inside of each and every one of us. Nehemiah rebuilt the city, but God is looking to redeem the city. And he's making right now a perfect city for us that we can live in for eternity with him. Jesus is the new permanent temple, law, and city. And that city has a future that cannot be shaken, that cannot be destroyed in the same way that it was in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So I was driving home a couple weeks ago and I saw this picture, if we can pull up that picture, of a retaining wall. And obviously you can see that it's not working anymore. But I thought it was such a perfect illustration of kind of what I'm talking about today, where, and go to the next slide, what they used worked for a while. Because, those are massive trees. But eventually, it stopped working. And my question for you all is, what is your foundation? What is your foundation? Because oftentimes we think we can have a foundation that's working because maybe for a little while it is working. But if our foundation is not Jesus, eventually it's going to show signs of wear and tear and start to break. Maybe your foundation is security, having a great job, not having to be dependent on anyone else. You don't have any needs. You can buy anything you want. You live your life alone, independent from anyone else. Maybe that's your foundation. Maybe cultural Christianity is your foundation, where you just feel really good about defending doctrine or legislating repentance and sticking it to the man, all while being rude, arrogant, and mean to others. Maybe self-help books or systems is your foundation. Do you rely on those types of things more than you rely on Jesus? Do you put more time and attention and effort into those types of things more than you perhaps spend with Jesus? Is knowledge your foundation? I went to a Bible college for 4 years. I hope I would like to say I have a lot of knowledge. But if that's your foundation and that's it, it's not going to be enough. Does it give you more satisfaction in knowing terms and dates about the Bible rather than praying for someone in need? Demons know theology, but they don't know Jesus. They don't believe Jesus. Maybe service at this very church is your foundation. You like it when people see you and see you doing something good even. But if service at the church and people looking at you and that's what makes you feel good, I don't know. That might not be a good foundation. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah shows us that we can't do it all on our own. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah points us to our need for Jesus. It points to the fact that we need a new heart. So go ahead and show the other wall. Literally across the street was this retaining wall. And that retaining wall has a good foundation. This one is not falling apart. Jesus is our new Exodus, and that has to be the foundation of our lives. And as a church, as we transition in this time that we are transitioning, what foundation do we have? If it's Jesus, it's going to be fine. We're going to be fine. At the end of Nehemiah, he comes back and he kind of tears into people for not following what he put into place. He even like rips out people's hair. Like, not a good leader right there, right? But it reminded me, like, if Stephen were to come back into this church after he maybe has been gone for a while, I hope that he's not going to come in and just be distraught that our foundation wasn't truly Jesus Christ. And so I'm going to finish by reading 1 Corinthians 3, and I'm going to start in verse 11. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one we already have, Jesus Christ. Anyone who builds on that foundation may use a variety of materials: gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, straw. But on the judgment day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person has work of any value. If the work survives, that builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. Don't you realize that you are all together the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God lives in you? There's another design pattern. You are the temple of God. God will destroy anyone who destroys this temple, for God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. Stop deceiving yourselves. If you think you are wise by the world's standards, you need to become a fool to be truly wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness to God, as the scriptures say. He traps the wise in their snares of their own cleverness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise. He knows they are worthless. So don't boast about following any particular human leader, for everything belongs to you. Whether Paul or Apollos or Peter or the world or life and death or the present or the future, everything belongs to you, and you belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God.